Last spring, I upgraded my battery system to lithium batteries, and I'm extremely happy with the results. Last season was the first season I could confidently run the icebox and instruments on a passage without worrying about the battery banks losing charge. Prior to the upgrade, I was limping on end-of-life Lifeline gel cell batteries, which weighed 75 pounds each and were demonstrating a decreasing ability to maintain a charge. This was a battery bank of 5 batteries. These batteries were rated to last 5 years, so I was ecstatic that they lasted close to 10 years. But also, I knew that the chickens would soon be coming home to roost, and that's what happened. As a sailor and boat owner, I want to make sure more sailors out there understand that you can do things like upgrading the battery system yourself. Even if the topic or system seems complex and intimidating, it's doable. This is a key reason why I create and contribute on YouTube, to share what I learned so that you also might benefit. But what qualifications do I have to take on a project like this? Well, I'm currently studying for the ABYC Standards certification and plan to pass that exam in January 2026. I've done much reading and self-tutelage on the topic of electricity and have done many boat projects involving the electrical system over the past 6 years. It might also be worth noting that my father was an electrician. I grew up around working on electricity, and I just enjoy learning about the topic in general. There are real safety concerns and fire dangers when dealing with an electrical system, so I'm not encouraging you to tackle such a project without the appropriate information or knowledge. Properly sizing and connecting wires, properly selecting and placing overcurrent protection are 2 extremely important considerations with a project such as this. On that score, if you feel like you could use some extra educational resources, you might want to check out boathowto.com. Nigel Calder is involved in that organization, and the courses there look very credible and useful to me. I'm not being compensated for this recommendation, but I am sorely tempted to bolster my own knowledge of the electrical system on boats with these courses. Also, I will continue putting out videos related to boat maintenance and will likely cover further information on boat electrical systems in the future. Lithium batteries are a very enticing option to replace traditional lead-acid batteries on a boat because they are light, they charge faster, they last longer, and offer more capacity for the same amount of space. They, in some ways, are a no-brainer. Doing my research in early 2025, I was very hopeful that lithium battery technology had moved beyond the early adoption phase. Had the time come where the safety standards had caught up with this technology and had enough suppliers enter the market so that the prices would come down to a reasonable level? Here's what I found. The costs of lithium iron phosphate batteries have indeed come down significantly from where they were just 2 to 4 years ago. The American Boat and Yacht Council standards are in place for lithium batteries. This is the main standards organization for recreational boats. The battery management systems installed with lithium batteries have a proven track record in mitigating the potential for fire danger associated with lithium batteries. But converting to lithium meant that I had to pretty much replace the entire electrical system that was feeding power to the DC panel behind me. That would include the solar charger and the AC to DC battery charger. I also had to consider the alternator and how to leverage its output to charge the new lithium battery bank. Which brings me to the first lesson I learned. Tracing the old wires between the batteries, the engine, and the distribution panel, and subsequently drawing my own wiring diagram showing what currently existed and how I wanted the new system to work was incredibly useful in demystifying the entire electrical system. It's a time commitment and tedious to do, requiring crawling into tight spaces, but I can't stress enough how doing this step methodically puts any boat owner or repair person ahead of the game. Once put on paper, these wiring diagrams acted as blueprints that I was able to compare against many other online resources and manufacturer wiring diagrams to make sure that I was following the best practices when installing the new system. Lesson number 2 was to treat the decision to upgrade to lithium batteries separately for each circuit. Boats generally have batteries divided into two circuits, one to start the engine and one to service the running boat's needs. Currently, there is a higher cost associated with upgrading the starter battery to lithium because that battery will usually be directly connected to the boat's alternator. The alternator's purpose is to charge the battery while the engine is running. Upgrading the alternator or alternator controller to be compatible with a lithium starter battery carries with it extra cost, and if that's neglected, a lithium starter battery can head fake and burn out a legacy alternator. Alternators are designed to push more and more amps when the amps are not being accepted, while a battery management system on a lithium battery at times will stop accepting amps from a charging source to protect the battery from overheating. The alternator can subsequently burn itself out under this circumstance. Learning this, I decided to upgrade the starter battery to a new AGM lead-acid battery and kept the starter battery on a completely separate circuit from the lithium house battery circuit. I then installed a DC to DC charger so that when the diesel engine is running and the alternator is supplying charge to the starting battery, the house bank can benefit from those charging amps by drawing charge from the starter battery through the DC to DC charger. The DC to DC charger is a less expensive controller, at least half the cost at the time the decision was made, than would be upgrading the alternator and/or the alternator controller. It was also fairly easy to install, which was a big bonus. What voltage drop looks like and how to deal with it is the third lesson I learned during this experience. In the wake of upgrading the system and testing functionality, I ran into an electrical issue I've never really witnessed firsthand nor really heard about until it happened to me. When turning on the battery switches and then subsequently turning on switches on the panel for the radio, pumps, instruments, lights, I found that some items turned on, but the more switches I turned on, the more some instruments did not turn on. Some instruments or lights seemed to be getting less light or less charge than normal. The electrical system seemed constrained somewhere. In my past, when troubleshooting electrical problems, things either came on or they didn't. On or off, simple as that. Seeing electrical equipment struggling to function with some sort of constraint or choke that was occurring on the amperage coming through the wires, this was extremely new to me. This problem is called voltage drop, where resistance is present somewhere in the system, somewhere in the connection, and the way to troubleshoot it is to take a voltmeter or a multimeter and work your way up the circuit until you find where the choke point is. In my case, I found the issue had to do with the switch I had recently installed. Either I wired that switch incorrectly or the switch was bad, but in either case, the voltage drop was coming right at that switch. If you want further information on this topic, I created an entire video about it, so check that out here. An additional complication that arose in the wake of the upgrade was the presence of voltage coming through the starter circuit despite having the starter circuit switch turned off. I traced the source of the voltage to a wire that was connected through an independent circuit breaker up to the bow of the boat. The wire was connected to a whole separate battery I had taken for granted and overlooked. The battery was dedicated to the windlass. A windlass is an electrical device that pulls up the anchor chain. Windlasses are sometimes connected directly to a starter battery, while other times connected to a dedicated battery. The starter battery can be appropriate when the engine is running because the alternator can deal with the heavy amperage demands of the windlass trying to pull up heavy anchor chain out of the water. I decided to pull out that old battery and replace it with a lithium starter battery. I treated this battery as an additional bank and connected it to the starter battery through a DC to DC charger, mimicking what was done for the lithium house bank, so that the independent battery would receive charging amps whenever the engine was under power, but the battery itself would service the needs of the windlass independently. The final lesson came from practically using the system and learning how lithium batteries charged and discharged in a practical way relative to lead acid batteries, which is what I was used to. Most boaters have learned how to monitor lead acid batteries with a voltage gauge, which can come in the form of digital or analog. When traditional lead acid batteries discharge, the voltage generally goes down in a steady linear direction, usually from 12.8 volts at a full capacity to under 11 volts. Charging lead acid batteries back up involves 3 stages of charging at a generally lower rate of charge than would be the case for lithium batteries. The 3 stages are bulk charge, where 10 to 20 amps would normally be supplied to about a 100 amp hour lead acid battery steadily for the first 40% of charging time. Phase 2 is the absorption charge phase, and this is where the amperage delivered is steadily reduced over the time, and that gets you to about 80% of charging time. The float phase is the last phase, and that is just a trickle charge that is provided for the last 20% of charging time to top off the batteries. Lithium batteries require a recalibration of expectations, especially when it comes to detecting when the batteries are significantly discharged. They are peak charged at 13.33 volts, but at 50% of discharge, the battery volt reading would still be at about 13 volts. The voltage reading of 12.8 would mean that the batteries are down to about a 20% charge. 12.8 would be a great reading for a lead acid battery. So again, you can't mistake the two. The profile of lead acid batteries is very different from the profile of lithium batteries. Recharging the batteries follows a similar profile to charging lead acid batteries, except the amount of charging amps accepted can be higher than traditional lead acid batteries. The first phase involves a steady high rate of charging amps for approximately 1/3 of the charging time. The second phase would include a declining rate of charge for an additional 50% of charging time, and then the third phase would be a trickle charge for whatever remaining charging time is left. There are many digital battery gauges that are calibrated for lithium battery banks and show you not only the voltage reading, but also the total capacity remaining in the batteries. My batteries also came with a Bluetooth connection for a phone app, so I can monitor the batteries through that app as well. I'm extremely happy with how this electrical system turned out and performed during last year's Chicago sailing season. Doing it myself has given me the appropriate motivation to ensure I've complied with all the current standards, which is why I'm taking the ABYC standard certification, and I plan to pass that exam in January. Let me know in the comments whether you'd like to see more content related to marine electrical systems, how electricity works, how the electrical system works on a boat, a little more step-by-step. I'd be happy to do that. It's a topic I really enjoy. I want to thank my subscribers. I really appreciate your support. If you have stayed to the end, I'd appreciate it if you'd press that like button. That would really help the channel grow. This is Sailor Eric. Thanks for watching.